The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle, as Catherine, Princess of Wales, paced nervously in her private sitting room. She glanced at the ornate clock on the mantelpiece for the fifth time in 10 minutes. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the delicate china teacups on the silver tray, a ritual that usually brought her comfort, but today only amplified her anxiety. The message had arrived 3 days earlier, delivered through channels so discreet that even her personal secretary remained unaware of its contents. The handwriting was unmistakable, though she hadn't seen it in over 15 years. Sarah Mitchell, her childhood friend from Bucklebury, was coming to see her. The same Sarah who had disappeared from her life when Catherine's relationship with Prince William became public. The same Sarah who had sold intimate stories to the tabloids for money she desperately needed to pay her mother's medical bills. Catherine understood the betrayal back then, even as it broke her heart. Sarah's mother was dying, and the family faced crushing debt from experimental treatments not covered by the NHS. The money from the tabloid stories had bought precious months of life, but it had cost Sarah the friendship that had sustained them both through their teenage years. Catherine had never blamed her friend, but the royal protection officers and palace advisors had ensured that all contact ceased immediately. Now Sarah was coming back, and the message had been brief but urgent. She needed to see Catherine alone, without palace interference, without royal handlers monitoring every word. The desperation in the hastily scrawled note was unmistakable, and despite the risks, Catherine had agreed to the meeting. The knock on the private entrance door was so soft that Catherine almost missed it. Her heart raced as she walked through the corridor, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. She paused at the door, taking a deep breath before turning the brass handle. Sarah stood in the doorway, and Catherine barely recognized the woman before her. Gone was the vibrant, confident girl who had once convinced Catherine to sneak out of their boarding school dormitory for midnight adventures. This Sarah was thin, her once bright blonde hair now dull and streaked with premature gray. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes, while clean, showed signs of wear and careful mending. "Sarah," Catherine whispered, her voice catching with emotion. "Hello, Kate." The use of her childhood nickname sent a wave of nostalgia through Catherine. No one called her that anymore, except William in their most private moments. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, years of hurt and longing passing between them. Then Catherine stepped forward and embraced her old friend, feeling how fragile Sarah had become, how her shoulders shook with barely contained tears. "Come in quickly," Catherine said, glancing around to ensure they hadn't been observed. She led Sarah through the private quarters to her sitting room, where the afternoon light filtered through tall windows overlooking the castle grounds. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the elegant surroundings. "It's really true, then?" she murmured. "You're actually living this life." "It's not what people imagine," Catherine replied, pouring tea with hands that had finally steadied. "But yes, it's my life now." They sat across from each other, the ornate coffee table between them feeling like an ocean of changed circumstances. Sarah accepted the tea but didn't drink it, instead wrapping her hands around the warm cup as if seeking comfort from its heat. "I shouldn't have come," Sarah said suddenly. "I know what I did all those years ago. I know I have no right to ask anything of you." "You were protecting your mother," Catherine said gently. "I understood then, and I understand now." "Do you?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Because I've spent every day since then hating myself for what I did to us, to our friendship. The money didn't even help in the end. Mum died anyway. And I'd destroyed the only real relationship I'd ever had." Catherine reached across the table and covered Sarah's hand with her own. "You didn't destroy anything. The circumstances destroyed it. There's a difference." "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something that's been eating at me for months. It's about those stories I sold to the papers." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Sarah, whatever it is— They weren't just asking for stories about our friendship, Sarah interrupted. They wanted information about William, too, about your relationship. Things I couldn't have known unless— She trailed off, unable to meet Catherine's eyes. Unless what? Catherine prompted, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Unless someone else was feeding them information. Someone close to the royal family. Sarah's words hung in the air like a death sentence. They knew things, Kate. Intimate details about your private conversations with William, about family meetings I could never have known about. They were using me as a front for a much bigger source. Catherine felt the world tilt around her. She had always believed that Sarah's betrayal, while painful, had been an isolated incident driven by desperate circumstances. The possibility that someone within the royal circle had been systematically leaking information was far more disturbing. Who? Catherine asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. I don't know for certain, Sarah admitted, but they paid me through an intermediary, someone who claimed to work for a public relations firm. I kept one of the business cards they gave me. She reached into her worn handbag and pulled out a creased card. The firm exists, but when I tried to research it years later, I found connections to some very powerful people who might not want William to have a successful marriage. Catherine studied the card, noting the expensive paper and elegant typography. The company name meant nothing to her, but she made a mental note to have it investigated discreetly. Why are you telling me this now? Catherine asked. Because I think they're still at it, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. I've been approached again, Kate. Different people, different company, but the same questions. They want to know if we've been in contact, if you've confided in me about your marriage, your children, your role in the family. The implications hit Catherine like a physical blow. Someone was still actively trying to destabilize her position within the royal family, using her past friendships as leverage. What did you tell them? Catherine asked. Nothing, Sarah said firmly. I told them I hadn't spoken to you in 15 years and had no intention of doing so. But Kate, they were persistent. They offered me more money than I could imagine, and when I refused, they started making threats. What kind of threats? Veiled at first. Mentions of how difficult it could be for someone with my background to find steady employment, how unfortunate it would be if certain past indiscretions became public knowledge again. But yesterday, Sarah's voice broke. Yesterday they followed me home. A black car parked outside my flat for hours. The message was clear. Catherine felt a surge of protective anger. You should have contacted the police. And told them what? That mysterious people in expensive cars are asking questions about the Princess of Wales? They'd either think I was delusional or assume I was trying to create some kind of publicity stunt. Catherine realized the impossible position Sarah was in. Her friend was caught between powerful forces that operated in shadows, people who could destroy her life with a phone call or elevate her circumstances with a single payment. The fact that Sarah had chosen to warn Catherine instead of taking the money spoke to the strength of their old friendship. You came here to warn me, Catherine said, but also because you're scared. Sarah nodded, tears finally spilling over. I don't know what to do, Kate. I don't know who these people are or what they're really after. I just know that they want to hurt you somehow, and they think I'm the key to doing it. Catherine stood and walked to the window, her mind racing. Below in the gardens, she could see the security teams conducting their regular patrols, unaware of the drama unfolding in the room above. In the distance, she noticed a figure standing at one of the upper-floor windows of the main castle building. Even from this distance, she could make out the distinctive silhouette of King Charles, her father-in-law, watching the grounds with what appeared to be keen interest. A new worry gnawed at her. How much did the king know about these ongoing attempts to destabilize her position? Was he merely an observer? Or was he somehow involved in the complex web of palace politics that seemed determined to test her loyalty and discretion? "Sarah," Catherine said, turning back to her friend, "I want you to stay here tonight, in the guest quarters. We need time to figure out how to handle this properly." "I can't," Sarah protested. "If they're watching, if they see me staying here—" "Then we'll make sure they don't see you leaving," Catherine said, with a determination that surprised them both. "You came here to warn me, and now it's my turn to protect you." As if summoned by her words, Catherine heard the soft chime that indicated someone was approaching through the private corridors. Her heart raced as footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the distinctive sound of royal protection officers coordinating their movements. "Hide in the bedroom," Catherine whispered urgently to Sarah. "Don't come out until I call for you." Sarah disappeared just as a gentle knock sounded on the sitting room door. Catherine smoothed her dress and assumed the composed expression she had perfected over years of royal duties. "Come in," she called, her voice betraying none of the tension she felt. The door opened to reveal one of King Charles's private secretaries, a man whose discretion was legendary but whose loyalties Catherine had begun to question. "Your Royal Highness," he said with a formal bow, "His Majesty requests your presence in the blue drawing room at your earliest convenience. He wishes to discuss some recent security concerns that have come to his attention." Catherine's blood ran cold. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone had seen Sarah arrive, and now she faced an impossible choice: reveal her friend's presence and potentially expose her to the very people who had been threatening her, or lie to the king and risk even greater consequences. "Of course," Catherine replied, her training in royal protocol overriding her personal fears. "Please inform His Majesty that I will join him momentarily." As the secretary withdrew, Catherine looked toward the bedroom where Sarah was hiding. The conversation with King Charles would determine whether her childhood friend was truly safe, or whether both of their lives were about to become far more complicated than either could have imagined. Catherine walked through the grand corridors of Windsor Castle with measured steps, her mind racing while her exterior remained perfectly composed. The blue drawing room was located in the state apartments, a deliberate choice by King Charles that signaled the formal nature of their upcoming conversation. As she passed beneath portraits of long-dead monarchs, Catherine couldn't help but wonder if they too had faced such impossible situations where personal loyalty collided with royal duty. The ornate doors to the blue drawing room stood open, flanked by two household guards whose expressionless faces revealed nothing. Catherine entered to find King Charles standing near the tall windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the castle grounds. The late afternoon light cast his profile in sharp relief, emphasizing the weight of recent months that had settled heavily on his shoulders since ascending to the throne. "Catherine," he said without turning around, "thank you for coming so promptly." "Of course, Your Majesty," she replied, offering a formal curtsy despite their family relationship. The formality of his tone suggested this was not a casual father-in-law conversation. "I trust you've been enjoying the privacy of your quarters today?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Catherine detected an undercurrent of something else in his voice. "Yes, thank you. I've been catching up on correspondence and preparing for next week's engagements." King Charles finally turned to face her, and Catherine was struck by the intensity in his eyes. "Correspondence," he repeated thoughtfully. "How interesting. I wasn't aware that you maintained such extensive personal communications." Catherine felt a chill of recognition. He knew about Sarah's visit, though she couldn't determine how much he actually understood about the situation. "I occasionally receive letters from old acquaintances," she said carefully. "Nothing that would concern the household staff." "Old acquaintances." The king moved away from the window and settled into one of the room's elegant armchairs, gesturing for Catherine to take the seat opposite him. Tell me, Catherine, what is your understanding of the security protocols that govern personal visitors to royal residences? The question was clearly a test, and Catherine realized she was walking through a minefield of palace politics and royal procedure. I understand that all visitors must be cleared through the appropriate security channels, and that any deviation from established protocols could compromise the safety of the royal family. Indeed. King Charles steepled his fingers, a gesture that reminded Catherine uncomfortably of his late mother's mannerisms. So you can imagine my concern when my security chief informed me that an unauthorized individual was observed entering the private quarters approximately 2 hours ago. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs, but she maintained her composure. I'm not aware of any unauthorized visitors, Your Majesty. No? The king's eyebrows rose slightly. How curious, because the same individual was photographed by our surveillance systems, and facial recognition software has already provided us with a positive identification. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a tablet, which he turned toward Catherine. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. The screen showed a clear image of Sarah approaching the private entrance, her face clearly visible despite her attempts to keep her head down. Catherine realized that denying Sarah's presence was no longer possible, but she could still try to control the narrative. I can explain, she began. I'm certain you can, King Charles interrupted. But before you do, I think it's important that you understand the full scope of what we're discussing here. He swiped to another image on the tablet. This photograph was taken by our long-range surveillance equipment approximately 30 minutes ago. The second image showed a black sedan parked on a public road nearly a mile from the castle grounds. 2 men in dark suits were clearly visible near the vehicle, one of whom appeared to be using high-powered binoculars directed toward the castle. Professional surveillance, the king continued. The vehicle has been there for over 3 hours, and our intelligence suggests these individuals have been monitoring castle activity for at least a week. The timing of their increased attention coinciding with your visitor is, I'm sure you'll agree, rather concerning. Catherine felt the walls closing in around her. Not only had Sarah's visit been discovered, but it appeared her friend had been followed to Windsor, potentially exposing the entire royal family to unknown threats. Your Majesty, Catherine said, I believe I can explain the situation, but it's more complicated than it might appear. I'm listening, the king said, his tone suggesting she had one opportunity to provide a satisfactory explanation. The visitor is Sarah Mitchell, a childhood friend from before my relationship with William became public. She contacted me because she believes she's being manipulated by people who want to gather information about our family. Catherine paused, choosing her next words carefully. She came to warn me, not to betray me. Warn you about what, specifically? Catherine took a deep breath, realizing that she was about to reveal information that could have far-reaching consequences. She was approached by individuals claiming to work for a media relations company. They offered her substantial sums of money for information about my private life, my marriage, my relationship with the children. When she refused, they began making threats. King Charles's expression remained neutral, but Catherine noticed a subtle tightening around his eyes. And you believed these claims? She provided evidence, Catherine said. Business cards, documentation of the approaches, but more importantly, she revealed that 15 years ago, when she sold stories to the tabloids, she wasn't the only source. Someone within royal circles was also providing information. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine watched as King Charles processed this revelation, his fingers drumming silently on the arm of his chair. You're suggesting that there has been a long-term breach of security within the royal household, he said finally. I'm suggesting that someone has been working to undermine my position within the family, possibly for years, Catherine replied. Sarah's refusal to cooperate with them recently may have triggered increased surveillance and pressure. And rather than bring these concerns to the appropriate security officials, you chose to handle the matter privately? Catherine realized the trap she had walked into. By meeting with Sarah secretly, she had violated security protocols and potentially endangered everyone in the castle. Yet revealing the threat through official channels might have exposed Sarah to even greater danger if the leak was coming from within the royal protection system itself. "I made a judgment call based on incomplete information," she admitted. "Perhaps it was the wrong decision, but I felt that Sarah's safety was at immediate risk." King Charles stood and walked to an ornate writing desk near the window. He opened a drawer and withdrew a manila folder, which he placed on the small table between their chairs. "Open it," he instructed. Catherine lifted the folder's cover to find a comprehensive dossier on Sarah Mitchell. The file contained photographs, financial records, employment history, and detailed reports of her activities over the past 5 years. What struck Catherine most forcefully was the thoroughness of the surveillance and the recent date stamps on many of the documents. "We've been monitoring Ms. Mitchell for some time," the king explained, "not because we considered her a threat, but because our intelligence services identified her as a potential target for exactly the kind of approach you've described." Catherine stared at the documents, realizing that Sarah's situation was far more complex than either of them had understood. "You knew she was being pressured?" "We suspected it. What we didn't anticipate was that she would attempt direct contact with you, or that you would agree to meet with her without consulting security." The king's voice carried a note of disappointment that cut deeper than anger would have. "Was I under surveillance as well?" Catherine asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Catherine, you are the Princess of Wales. Every member of this family is under constant protection, which necessarily includes monitoring of activities that might pose security risks. The question is not whether we observe, but how we respond to what we observe." The implications were staggering. Catherine realized that her every movement, every conversation, every decision was likely being recorded and analyzed by people whose job it was to protect the royal family from threats both external and internal. "So you know about the business card Sarah brought me? The evidence of the media company's connections?" "We do. And we've been investigating those connections for several months." The king returned to his chair and fixed Catherine with an intense stare. "What troubles me is not that Ms. Mitchell brought you this information, but that you felt you couldn't trust our security apparatus with it." Catherine felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I wasn't sure who could be trusted." "If there's been a leak within the household for 15 years, there has been no leak within the household," King Charles said firmly. "The information that was provided to the tabloids years ago came from external surveillance of your activities with William. Phone tapping, long-range photography, electronic eavesdropping. Ms. Mitchell was told there was an internal source to make her feel less guilty about her own cooperation." The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. Sarah had been carrying unnecessary guilt for over a decade, believing she had been part of a larger betrayal when in fact she had been the only source the tabloids had managed to compromise. "But the current threats against her are real," Catherine said. "The approaches, the surveillance we can see outside right now." "Absolutely real," the king confirmed. "Which is why Ms. Mitchell's safety has been our primary concern. The individuals targeting her represent a sophisticated operation that we believe is connected to several attempts to destabilize European royal families over the past 2 years." Catherine felt the complexity of the situation overwhelming her. What had seemed like a simple case of a friend in trouble had revealed layers of international intrigue that she was completely unprepared to navigate. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," King Charles said, "you're going to return to your quarters and bring Ms. Mitchell to this room. It's time she understood the full scope of what she's become involved in, and it's time we coordinated our response properly. And the people watching us from the road? They'll be dealt with by our security teams. But first, I need to understand exactly what Ms. Mitchell told you about her recent contacts. Every detail, every name, every communication method. If we're going to protect her effectively, we need complete information. Catherine stood to leave, but the king's voice stopped her at the door. Catherine, he said, his tone softer now. I understand your desire to protect an old friend, but in future, please remember that the best way to protect people you care about is to trust the security systems we have in place. They exist for everyone's benefit, not just ours. As Catherine walked back through the castle corridors, she wrestled with conflicting emotions. Relief that Sarah's situation was being taken seriously, anxiety about what the next few hours would bring, and a growing awareness that her life within the royal family was far more constrained and monitored than she had ever fully realized. The conversation with Sarah would be difficult, but it was necessary. Her friend needed to understand that her safety now depended on complete cooperation with people she had every reason to distrust, and Catherine needed to find a way to bridge the gap between Sarah's fears and the reality of royal protection protocols. As she approached her private quarters, Catherine noticed increased security presence in the corridors. The situation had clearly escalated beyond a simple family discussion, and she realized that the next few hours would determine not only Sarah's fate, but potentially her own standing within the careful balance of trust and security that governed royal family life. The weight of her position had never felt heavier, and Catherine found herself wondering if this was how every member of the royal family eventually learned that personal relationships and royal duties were sometimes irreconcilably opposed forces that demanded impossible choices. Catherine returned to her private quarters with her mind spinning from the revelations of her conversation with King Charles. The hallways that had always felt like home now seemed to close in around her. Every portrait and tapestry, a reminder of the weight of tradition and expectation that governed every aspect of her life. She paused outside her sitting room door, gathering herself before what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations she had ever had. Inside, she found Sarah exactly where she had left her, sitting on the edge of the bed in the adjoining room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The afternoon light had faded, casting long shadows across the room, and Sarah's face looked pale and drawn in the dim illumination. "Kate?" Sarah stood quickly as Catherine entered. "What happened? I heard footsteps in the corridor, voices. Are we in trouble?" Catherine closed the door carefully behind her and moved to sit beside her friend. "Sarah, I need to tell you something important, and I need you to listen to everything before you respond." Over the next 20 minutes, Catherine explained everything King Charles had told her. She watched as Sarah's face cycled through disbelief, anger, relief, and finally a deep sadness that seemed to settle into her bones. "So I've been carrying guilt for 15 years over something that wasn't even my fault?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "The tabloids would have gotten their information whether you cooperated or not," Catherine confirmed. "You were just an easier target for them to manipulate. And now I'm a target again, but this time for something much more dangerous." Sarah stood and walked to the window, though the heavy curtains prevented her from seeing outside. "Kate, I don't think you understand how scared I am. These people, they're not just offering money anymore. They made it very clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. That's why the king wants to see you. His security team can protect you, but they need to know everything about who approached you and how." Sarah laughed bitterly. "His security team? Kate, I've spent the last 15 years as a pariah because of my connection to you. I work 3 part-time jobs to pay rent on a tiny flat, and I haven't been able to maintain a serious relationship because anyone who gets close to me eventually gets approached by reporters asking questions. Now I'm supposed to trust the same system that's allowed me to be hunted for over a decade?" Catherine felt the weight of her friend's resentment, understanding for the first time the real cost of their childhood connection. While Catherine had found love, marriage, and a position of influence and comfort, Sarah had been left to navigate a world where her past friendship made her a perpetual target for exploitation. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never realized—" "Of course you didn't realize," Sarah interrupted, but her tone was more tired than angry. "You've been living in a protected bubble while I've been dealing with the consequences of knowing you in the real world. And now that bubble includes me, and I'm supposed to be grateful for it?" Before Catherine could respond, both women froze at the sound of footsteps approaching rapidly in the corridor outside. These weren't the measured steps of palace staff or the coordinated movement of protection officers. Someone was running. A sharp knock on the door was followed immediately by the voice of Catherine's personal protection officer. "Your Royal Highness, I need you to step away from the windows and move to the center of the room immediately." Catherine's blood ran cold. "What's happening?" "There's been a security incident on the grounds. Please comply with my instructions while we assess the situation." Sarah grabbed Catherine's arm. "They found me. Kate, they followed me here and now they're going to—" "Calm down," Catherine said, though her own heart was racing. "Let me talk to my protection officer." She moved toward the door. "James, what kind of security incident?" "Multiple vehicles breached the outer perimeter approximately 5 minutes ago. We have teams responding, but I need you both to remain in the interior room until we can confirm the threat status." The sound of helicopter rotors echoed outside, growing louder by the minute. Sarah backed away from the curtained windows, her eyes wide with terror. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I led them right to you." Catherine moved to the communication panel beside her door and pressed the direct line to the Security Command Center. "This is Princess Catherine. I need to speak with the King immediately." "Your Royal Highness, His Majesty is currently in emergency consultation with the security chiefs. I can relay a message. Tell him that Ms. Mitchell believes the security incident is directly related to her presence here. She may have information that could help resolve the situation." The reply came back within moments. "His Majesty requests that you both remain in your current location until escort teams can provide safe transport to the Secure Communications Center." Catherine ended the call and turned back to Sarah, who was now sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, I need you to tell me exactly who approached you and what they said about their timeline. If they're this desperate to reach you, there must be something specific thereafter." "They said they had a deadline," Sarah said through her tears. "Something about a story they needed to publish before the end of the month. They mentioned other royal families, other operations. Kate, I think I'm just one piece of something much bigger." The implications hit Catherine like a thunderbolt. If Sarah was correct, then the people pursuing her weren't just interested in tabloid gossip about the British royal family. They were part of a coordinated effort to destabilize multiple European monarchies, and Sarah somehow held information that could compromise their entire operation. "What exactly did they ask you about?" Catherine pressed. "Not just about you and William. They wanted to know about other people you might have met through royal functions, foreign dignitaries, other royal family members, politicians. They seemed particularly interested in any conversations you might have had about international relations or diplomatic matters." Catherine felt a chill of recognition. The questions Sarah described weren't about personal scandal or family drama. They were intelligence gathering, the kind of information that could be used to compromise diplomatic relationships or international negotiations. "Sarah, I think you may have been targeted because they believe you have access to state-level information through our friendship. But I don't. I haven't seen you in 15 years. They don't know that, or they don't care. They may believe that our friendship has continued in secret and that I've been feeding you sensitive information that you could be persuaded to share." The helicopter noise outside intensified, joined now by what sounded like multiple vehicles moving at high speed across the castle grounds. Through the thick walls, they could hear the distant sound of shouted orders and radio communications. Catherine's communication panel chimed with an incoming priority message. She activated the speaker. "Your Royal Highness, this is Security Chief Morrison. We have the situation contained, but I need to inform you that we intercepted communications suggesting that the individuals involved believe Ms. Mitchell possesses compromising recordings of conversations with members of the royal family." Catherine looked at Sarah in confusion. "Recordings?" Sarah's face had gone completely white. "Kate, when they first approached me last month, they gave me a phone. They said it was so they could contact me directly, but—" She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a smartphone that Catherine didn't recognize. "Sarah, have you had that phone with you this entire time?" "Yes. They said never to turn it off, never to leave it behind. Oh my God, Kate, do you think it's been recording our conversation?" The reality of the situation crashed down on both women simultaneously. If Sarah's phone had been recording their conversation, then whoever was behind the threats now had extensive audio of Catherine discussing security protocols, family dynamics, and sensitive information about royal protection systems. Catherine grabbed her own phone and speed-dialed King Charles's direct line. When he answered, his voice was tense but controlled. "Catherine, are you both safe?" "Yes, but Your Majesty, there's been a complication. Sarah has been carrying a phone provided by the people who approached her. It may have been recording our conversations." The silence on the line was deafening. When the king spoke again, his voice carried a weight that Catherine had never heard before. "Catherine, I need you to listen very carefully. Do not touch that phone. Do not turn it off. Do not say anything else until my technical team arrives at your location. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "And Catherine, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that this situation is going to require decisions that may be very difficult for both of you." The line went dead, and Catherine looked at Sarah, who was staring at the phone in her hands as if it were a venomous snake. "Kate, what have I done?" Before Catherine could answer, they heard the unmistakable sound of the door to the outer corridor being unlocked from outside. Multiple sets of footsteps entered the suite, accompanied by the electronic beeping of sophisticated equipment. "Your Royal Highness," called a voice Catherine didn't recognize. "This is the technical security team. We're here to secure the communications device." Catherine moved toward the door, separating them from the main room. "Sarah, whatever happens next, I want you to know that I don't blame you for any of this. But I led them right to you. I brought a recording device into your private space. Kate, they're going to have everything we said about your family, about security, about the truth," Catherine interrupted. "That you're my friend, that you've been trying to protect me, and that you've been victimized by people who prey on loyalty and desperation." The door opened to reveal King Charles himself, flanked by several individuals in dark suits carrying electronic equipment. His expression was grim but determined. "Ms. Mitchell," he said directly to Sarah, "I need you to place the phone on the table and step back slowly." Sarah complied, her movements careful and deliberate. One of the technicians immediately began scanning the device with handheld equipment, while another set up what appeared to be a signal blocking system. "Your Majesty," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to warn Kate about the people who were threatening me." King Charles studied Sarah for a long moment before responding. "Ms. Mitchell, you've been manipulated by very sophisticated people who specialize in exploiting emotional connections for intelligence purposes. The fault lies with them, not with you. But the recordings will be analyzed and contained," the king said firmly. "But Ms. Mitchell, I'm afraid your situation has now become a matter of national security. The people who have been pursuing you are part of a network that we've been tracking across multiple countries. Your cooperation with our investigation is no longer optional." Sarah looked at Catherine with an expression of desperate confusion. "What does that mean?" "It means," Catherine said gently, "that you're going to be under royal protection whether you want it or not. And it means that your old life, whatever was left of it, is probably over." As if to punctuate her words, the sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere in the castle, followed by shouting and what sounded like gunfire in the distance. King Charles spoke rapidly into a radio handset. "All units, implement Protocol 7 immediately. I want full lockdown and prepare for emergency extraction." He turned to Catherine and Sarah. "Ladies, I'm afraid we're going to have to continue this conversation from a more secure location." Through the curtained windows, they could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles and the beams of searchlights sweeping the castle grounds. Sarah Mitchell, who had come to Windsor Castle hoping to save her old friend from unseen threats, was about to discover that some secrets were dangerous enough to change everything for everyone involved. As the protection teams prepared for their movement to the secure facilities, King Charles caught Catherine's eye and shook his head slightly. The message was clear. Whatever happened next, their families' carefully maintained privacy and security had been fundamentally compromised, and the consequences would extend far beyond anything any of them had imagined. Sarah's tears had stopped, replaced by a hollow expression of someone who finally understood the true scope of what she had stumbled into. Her attempt to protect Catherine had instead placed them all at the center of an international incident that would have repercussions for years to come. The helicopter outside grew louder, and through the chaos, Catherine realized that this was how ordinary people got swept up in events far larger than themselves, how personal loyalty could collide with national interests, and how the price of friendship sometimes included everything you thought you knew about your own life.